In practically every group, there are rule keepers, and we're kind of finding out some of the rule keepers with COVID, aren't we? And in the same group, there are others whose goal seems to be breaking as many rules as they can, but not so noticeably that they get in trouble. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus calls out religious leaders who went to great lengths to water down and to deflect rules that God had very clearly written into the law of Moses. When the people were camped near Mount Sinai, after they got out of slavery in Egypt, you remember that God gave them specific instructions on how to worship. He gave them a moral code, then he gave them a set of civil laws to govern their society. And some of the instructions were quite precise. I mean, he detailed things like, okay, here's the kind of thread you should use when you're making these curtains for the tabernacle. The Ten Commandments were very specific. There's no question in our minds what those Ten Commandments mean. But in other areas, God gave broad principles that he wanted his people to live by. And some of those principles give a little wiggle room that people who want to try to break laws will take full advantage of. I mean, the law said that landowners had to leave the corners of their fields. You know that. So poorer people could come and glean. What's the one example we know of in the Bible? Yeah, Ruth. Yeah, Ruth went and gleaned in whose field? Boaz, not Nathan, but Boaz, okay? Boaz's field. So, some farmer asks, well, okay, so how much of a corner do I have to leave unharvested? Or what if I have a corner that nothing happens to be growing in there? Can I count that? Or maybe I didn't quite get my seeds scattered over there. Am I still obligated to the gleaners if the corners don't have any good grain in them? Well, you take the time between Moses and the time of Jesus, you've got a lot of time for people to look at the rules and to try to figure out ways that the rule doesn't really say what the rule says. And so in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, 6 different times he says, now you have heard it said, and what he's doing, he's quoting the teachings of the Pharisees, the scribes, and the rabbis. You have heard it said, and then Jesus added, but I say. So he's going to correct them. I mean, the law said, one of the commandments, do not murder. But over the years, Jewish lawyers and scholars kind of just raised some questions. Well, what do you mean exactly by murder? I mean, how far can you go and still not really technically be guilty of murder? So responding to this, Jesus dialed back those legal opinions, and he said, well, actually, it's even stronger than the original rule, because murder is the same as a hatred is the same as murder. You go, whoa, that's not what they want. The law said to give tithes and offerings at the tabernacle or the temple. And Jesus said, yeah, those tithes and offerings are important, but you guys have made them too important, because God actually values relationships more than he values people giving money. If you're bringing your money to the temple and it comes to mind somebody that has something against you, don't bring your money. And you can see the Pharisees and the scribes start quivering about now. Don't bring your money. He says, go make things right with this other person before you tithe. In Matthew 5:27, Jesus says that he talks about the law that said you could divorce. Moses put this law in place. It was from God because of the rebellion, because of the stubbornness of their hearts. That's what it says. Well, the Jewish leaders took that law on what was allowed, things that were allowable for divorce, and said, well, it's probably more than just adultery. And see, in the law it said a man could divorce a woman. A woman could not divorce a man. Couldn't. In fact, it got so bad by Jesus' time that men could practically for any reason divorce their wives. If their wives burnt the dinner, they could divorce them. If all a man had to do was swear in front of the priest, she is unpleasing to me. Goodbye. Just like that. So you can see that they totally missed the point of the law that allowed divorce for adultery. Anytime somebody tries to figure out how far they can go before something barely crosses the line into sin, that's pretty dangerous territory. The Old Testament law said, don't break your oaths. If you make an oath, you swear an oath to something. That law was so watered down, so abused, that by the time Jesus came along, it meant virtually nothing. Jesus said, instead of trying to walk this razor's edge on misleading someone and pretending that you're telling the truth, just don't even make oaths at all. Just keep your word. Tell the truth. And then we come to verse 38 in Matthew chapter 5. And if you have a Bible with you, ask you to open it, or actually on the back sheet of the lyric sheet that you got when you came in. It's back there too. Sam Moffat, I asked Sam to come up and read for us this scripture passage that we're in today, verses 38 to 42. In fact, why don't all of you stand if you're able. Stand up, and then Sam is going to lead us and read along with Sam.
Matthew 5, 38 through 42. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you.
Great. Thank you. You may be seated. Thank you, Sam. Great to have you up front. Great to have Nathan and Rachel up front. Man, that's great. Rachel's playing the keyboard on this. What do you call that thing?
Melodica.
Melodica, thank you. Or she's usually plugged into a different kind of keyboard. Like, did everybody know except me that? I mean, pretty much. All right. Jesus says, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Yes, that's exactly what the law said in 3 different places. In Exodus chapter 2 and in Deuteronomy chapter 19, Leviticus 24, all of them repeat what's known as the law of exact retribution. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Now, when you first hear that phrase, it can sound a little stark, a little cold. But actually, it was a very merciful law that God put in place. Because without this law, somebody does something against someone, every person could exact any justice, quote unquote, that they wanted. And that justice often looked more like revenge. Did you know that the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that predated Moses, though? Moses lived about 1400 BC. 400 years before, in Babylon, there was a king named, anybody want to guess at the name? Hammurabi. Who said that? All right, good job, Dan. Hammurabi. And Hammurabi inscribed on a 7.5-foot tall rock 282 laws along with appropriate punishments. Some of you have probably seen the rock in the Louvre, in the museum in Paris. It is the oldest code of law that archaeologists have unearthed, and it parallels many of the Old Testament laws. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth is on that rock. So in cultures where exact retribution laws are not in place, small infractions can escalate into blood feuds. One family, one tribe against another tribe, one village against another village. It happens constantly in the country of South Sudan, which, as you know, has part of my heart, having been there many times. I read the news of Sudan every day. And 12 days ago, 15 people were killed when one tribe attacked another tribe and stole 1,000 of their cows. Cows are the currency. That's the measure of wealth in South Sudan. So they attack them and they kill 15 people, take 1,000 cows. But that raid was payback for an attack that took place a month earlier in the other direction. They took a bunch of cows and killed 30 people. For generations, the three major tribes in South Sudan, the Dinka, the Nuer, and the Murle, have stolen cattle and abducted women and children and taken crops and burned villages. In fact, July 28th, there was an Anglican priest who with his wife and son were killed in having nothing to do with the cattle or the raid, but they were killed. It's just kind of senseless killing. And almost like clockwork, 3 days later, guess what? There's another attack. 2,000 cattle taken, 10 people killed. So you got these cycles over and over and over again. So something as simple as an accidental trespass can lead to something like a beating, which gets paid back by a homicide, which gets paid back by a double homicide or triple homicide. And it can escalate all the way to what we saw in Rwanda in 1994, a genocide that lasted 100 days and took the lives of 800,000 Tutsis because they were Tutsi instead of Hutu. I was there just shortly afterwards when the stench of these rotting bodies still filled the air. That genocide happened because in Rwanda, Burundi, there was no penal code, no law code that said an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. They'd never agreed on that. That autonomous zone in Seattle, see, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, you don't have to be a student of history to realize that is not going to work. You have to have a system of laws. The Code of Hammurabi and the Law of Moses form the basis for the laws in most civilized countries today. Good laws take retribution out of the hands of individuals and hand it to civil authorities. When an offense happens, 911, call the police. The police come and they separate victims from offenders. They hold on to offenders until the courts can decide what is an appropriate damage, what is eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, what's equitable in this situation. So Jesus says, you have all heard an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. You're going, whoa, 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 whoa. What's he doing? What does he mean? Don't resist. I mean, you mean don't resist at all? He said, do not resist an evil person. So the great Russian novelist Tolstoy starts reading the Bible, and he gets to the Sermon on the Mount, and he reads this, and he took it absolutely literally. Tolstoy believed that Christians should never resist evil. Not only that, but Tolstoy said that Christians should never have anything to do with the armed forces, never have anything to do with law enforcement, never have anything to do with courts of law. So he took this to mean that Christ was endorsing absolute and unconditional pacifism. You know who was influenced by Tolstoy's writing? What world figure? There was a young Indian man who was studying in South Africa, and he came on Tolstoy's writings, and he got to this part and he goes, okay, that really resonated with him. His name was Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was studying in South Africa. So he went all in on Tolstoy's ideas. And Gandhi taught that even passive resistance was wrong. Gandhi envisioned a state where the police would never carry weapons, would seldom use force. There would be no need for punishment. There'd be no need for prisons. Arbitration would always replace litigation. He wasn't the first one to come up with, Tolstoy wasn't the first to come up with the pacifist idea. Back in the 16th century, Martin Luther wrote about one poor monk, this is funny but it's not funny, who took pacifism so far that he would not resist. He would do nothing to hinder the lice living in his hair and biting through his skin. In World War II, Gandhi urged the Jews not to resist Hitler in Germany. In World War II, he told the British they should stop defending themselves against against Germany. So, you put a guy like Gandhi in Russia in 1925 or in Germany in 1933, put him in North Korea today, he would vanish within a couple days. You'd never hear of him again. So, if pacifism was not what Jesus had in mind, all right, what was he saying? Well, anytime you read the Bible and you come across something that tilts your head, three things should happen. The first thing you should do is look at the context. What is the context of this? Practically every day we see on the news things that are taken out of context and then used in a way to say something that the person never meant to say. Context is number one. Now, after context, what we do with the Bible is we study the actual words and the phrases and the paragraphs in the original languages to understand what the inspired words of Scripture meant when that original author wrote them down. And then third, after you got context and you got biblical languages, and then third, you look at and see what other scriptures say about this, because there's no way Jesus is going to say something that contradicts other things in the Bible, all right? So, what about context? Let's start there. Jesus had been talking about all these ancient laws and how the Pharisees had taken these laws and twisted them so that the original meaning was lost. God instituted an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth as a civil law. It was not a religious law. It was a law intended for civil society. Well, what happened was the religious leaders saw an advantage in that law for themselves. So they took it out of the civil realm and they personalized it for themselves. They made it justification for their personal revenge. The exact opposite of what Jesus or what God intended. And if you look at Iran today, that's exactly, you've got religious leaders who are deciding what to do with things that should be civil law. Because Jesus wants to highlight God's original intent in eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. He gives 4 examples of individuals who are not authorized to take vengeance based on this law. Jesus doesn't say there should never be civil or judicial remedies. He just says that individuals can never be a law unto themselves. God gave this law to society. Now, I've said many times that our job as believers is not to be judges. Unfortunately, that is what many Christians, what many churches are known for. Being judges, being judgmental. Our job is not to decide anyone's guilt or innocence before God. It's not our job to prescribe punishment for anybody or to carry out that punishment. Our job is to love people, to share the gospel, to point people to Christ, and to emphasize that Jesus says to love others even to the point of accepting personal injustice. Now, one more point before we go on to look at these examples. Now, when Jesus was preaching the Sermon on the Mount, there's a literary device that he used repeatedly in the Sermon on the Mount. And the device is called hyperbole. You know what hyperbole means? Hyperbole was meant to kind of grasp somebody's attention and make them look at something they would otherwise not really look at. Jesus exaggerated. He used hyperbole intentionally many times in the Sermon on the Mount. Everybody knew he was exaggerating. You and I do the same thing. We do it all the time. Oh, that was a hyperbole. I just said all the time. We don't do it all the time. But you understood exactly what I meant, didn't you? You say, traffic today was horrible. Everybody and their brother was out there. Really? Everybody and their brother was out there? I'm so tired of on this hike. My feet are killing me. That's serious. Look at her, she's crying her eyes out. I have a million things going today, and you're bothering me with this? What did you put in there? Your backpack weighs a ton. See, Jesus said back in verse 29, he used this, this is actually the second time, but it's a great example of hyperbole. He said, if your right eye causes you to sin, do what? Tear it out. Gouge it out. So you're on your computer, your iPad, and you're looking up something on Amazon, and something that you really can't afford, but you really, really, really want it. You still really want it. You start reading all about it. You look at all the comments, and everybody likes this product. You really think you need that. Or maybe if you came in after Paul Obrist, you coveted his Camaro that he drove here today. Okay, if you did, I hope you're one-eyed by now, all right? Here's the question. Is putting eyes out a cure for covetousness? Is it possible to covet if you only have one eye? Or do blind people have an advantage because they never covet? He said in verse 30, he said, if your right hand causes you to sin, do what? Cut it off and throw it away. Have you ever known anybody who has lost a hand in an industrial or a farm accident or something? Did that person suddenly become sinlessly perfect? I mean, they just cut off they lost their hand that says right hand causes you to sin. What Jesus is saying is, you guys need to take sin seriously. You need to stop excusing yourself. Stop rationalizing. Take whatever action is necessary to deal with sin. So, verse 39 is another hyperbolic statement. Do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Literally, Jesus is simply saying it's better to suffer wrong than to take liberties that God didn't delegate to you. Because if you take those liberties, it's likely to cause you to sin. So that's the context. Now, what about the original language? I actually studied this quite a bit, and to be quite honest, most of it was really boring. But let me just give you one example. There's a lot that I could, there's tenses and grammar, and you go, yeah, obviously he was not talking about personal retribution, or the law does not refer to that. The word resist, if you're looking at the text in verse 39, where he says, do not resist, that is strictly a legal term, okay? Resist is a legal term. You can't do that. Don't try to be the law. You're not the law, all right? Context, the original languages, and then third, what does the rest of the Bible say? Well, the rest of the Bible says a lot when it comes to when someone hurts you or does evil things against you. It says a lot about what we should do in the face of evil. James 4:7, submit yourselves to God. What's the next phrase? Anybody know? Submit yourselves therefore to God. The devil, what's the word? Resist the devil. Resist the devil. Oh, I thought we were not supposed to resist evil. No, we are supposed to resist evil. Resist the devil and he will run from you. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10. Be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God so that you may be able to, what? Resist. Stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers, authorities, and so on. So you can resist evil. We should resist evil. We should resist sin. So Jesus clearly was not speaking literally when he said, do not resist evil. One other historical cultural note. When Jesus talked about turning the other cheek, did you know that he probably didn't have in mind a physical attack? What he had in mind was something that was kind of cultural, but to slap somebody on the cheek was an idiom for insulting. So if you're slapping someone on the cheek, you're insulting them. A slap on the right cheek was the ultimate insult in Jesus' day. You know why? Because it's a backhanded slap. Okay, so you're facing somebody, you're facing another person, and if God made you right, your right hand is dominant. Okay? Sorry. 10% of you, sorry. It's a backhand. To hit somebody on the right cheek, you would do a backhand. Okay? You wouldn't go around like that. In the rabbinic teaching in Jesus' day, this was the deepest insult you could give another person, was to slap them, backhand them on the right cheek. So Jesus is talking about being insulted more than he is being assaulted. A backhand expressed contempt and disdain. It said basically, you're a nothing to me. So think about it. Who in the Gospels got backhanded worst of all? Who? Jesus, yeah. Who backhanded him? The religious leaders, the Pharisees and the scribes. But Jesus had already said early in chapter 5, he'd already said, of course this is going to happen. He said, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Jesus' followers were not to insult back when they were insulted for Christ's sake. Jesus was the lamb before his shearers. He didn't even try to even the score, and neither should we. God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. So let's let God do it. People with the power of revenge can be really dangerous. In the Godfather movie, there's a line that says, revenge is a dish best served cold. Kind of says it, doesn't it? A while back, there was a Christian woman who had gotten fired from a local, this has happened in Gresham actually, from a local Christian nonprofit. She'd gotten fired because they had some issues with her in her style. She felt like she was wronged by this nonprofit, and she wanted to sue them for the wrong. So she asked what Cornerstone's elders would think about this. And so we said, it's pretty clear what Jesus says here. It's better to be wronged it's better to suffer some injustice than to make a big scene about it. Not only that, but in 1 Corinthians 6, there's Paul writing to the church in Corinth, and he says, I can't believe you guys. You've got one Christian taking another Christian to court over something that should be resolved in the church, and you're ruining the reputation of Christians and the church in the process. He said, this should not be. So that's what I told her. She didn't like that. Not at Cornerstone anymore. I'm not anymore. I don't know why. Now, let me say again, there is a time for legal redress in civil courts. But if you go there, understand it is very hazardous. It is very difficult for Christians to litigate without firing up our sin nature at the same time. Very hard. So a second example that Jesus gave is in verse 40. In this illustration, somebody is trying to literally take the shirt off your back. They take the shirt off your back, they sue you for your shirt, and Jesus says, give your coat too. Actually, that statement was a giveaway that he's using hyperbole again. Because under Roman law, this is Roman Empire law, it was illegal to take someone's coat. You could not take someone's coat. The third example is an interesting one. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. And again, in the Roman Empire, any uniformed soldier or any government official on government business could compel any other person to carry their gear for 1,000 steps. Now, 1,000 steps would be just over a mile, depending on how long your steps are, about a mile, let's say. And it's quite likely that many Jews, many of Jesus' listeners, perhaps most even of the adults, have been subject to this real indignity of being forced to take those 1,000 steps with somebody else's pack, and they universally resented that. In fact, just an interesting sidelight, many scholars believe that's how Simon of Cyrene ended up carrying Jesus' cross, because the Roman soldiers were taking Jesus to be executed, and they said, hey, you, come take this burden. Going the extra mile is really more about attitude than anything else. Now, you can choose your attitude. I mean, if it's your job to mow the lawn, you can do it like Oscar the Grouch, or you can say, okay, it's not exactly what I wanted to do, but I'm going to get a little fresh air, I'm going to get a little exercise, the yard is going to look better, my parents are going to be happier, this is a win, I think I'll go mow the lawn. So what if you decided, instead of resenting the demand to carry this soldier's pack for 1,000 steps, what if you picked it up and you decided to engage that soldier in conversation? And then what if, oh, my wife would freak out, there's a big old spider crawling up on my notes. He's okay. I'm a pacifist when it comes to spiders. So you get done with the first mile and you say, hey, could I go another mile with you? Can you imagine the shock on that soldier's face? You're going to go another mile. Chances are very good by the time you got done with that second mile, you made a friend. You made a friend. The last example is in verse 42. Finish up with this. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Now remember what Jesus is teaching. The overall thing is, don't take personal vengeance. It's not up to you to make right all of the wrong things in society. He is not teaching about panhandling. He's not teaching about lending money. He's teaching about his followers not getting all bent out of shape because somebody else is doing something they should not be doing. You know, we often have transients hanging out around the office where our office is. There's an old office complex and it's got big overhangs and it's just irresistible to people that want to get out of the rain and have a nap. And it's fairly frequent that when I get there in the early morning, somebody's sleeping. In fact, it was true yesterday. Somebody was sleeping with their bicycle was next to them. They're right next to the office door. Sometimes they're blocking the door, and so I have to do something before I can get into the office. Now I have to be honest. I wish they were not there. I wish they were in downtown Portland, or I wish they were in San Francisco. I wish they were anywhere else but right in front of my office door. But when they're there in front of the office door, I have a choice. I can be rude, believe me, I can be very rude, or I can be polite. Or there's one other option, I can let Tosti take care of it. I don't know why, but she loves jumping on sleeping people. She just goes up and jumps on them, and she's wagging her tail like this, and they wake up usually scared to death when they see this dog. It's actually quite entertaining, though. I can demand that they get lost, and if they don't, I'm going to call the cops. I could do that. I think I did that once, a long time ago. Or I can say, hey, sorry, but sorry to wake you, but I need to get into this office here. Would that be okay? And it probably got people coming, so probably better if you didn't stay here too long. You know what happens? I don't think I've ever had a situation, now I'm not law enforcement, so I don't meet these people all the time. I don't ever had a situation where anybody woke up and wasn't apologetic for blocking the door. Every time. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, yeah, I'll get out of here. Like I say, I don't meet them every day. So Jesus says, treat people like people. It's not my job to rid the world of transient people. They are people with names. That's the other thing I've learned to do. When I wake them up and say, hey, what's your name? They're shocked that I want to know what their name is. Can I talk to them? People with names and feelings. I want to sum all this up and end with reading some advice that Paul wrote to the house churches in Rome. So Nathan, you can come on back up with your sister, and I'm just going to read this passage. People in these house churches in Rome were not being treated very well. So listen to Paul. Romans 12. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, Live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with